Marcus Thompson had always dreamed of serving the royal family. Standing at 6'2" with broad shoulders and keen gray eyes, he looked every bit the part of a royal protection officer. After 15 years in the military and 3 years of specialized security training, he finally achieved his goal when he was selected for the elite Royal Protection Squad. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine grounds of Clarence House as Marcus adjusted his earpiece and checked his watch. It was 7:30 a.m. on what seemed like an ordinary Tuesday in March. He had been assigned to Queen Consort Camilla's security detail for 8 months now, and had earned a reputation as one of the most dedicated and observant guards in the service. Marcus took pride in his work. Every morning he arrived 30 minutes early to review the day's schedule, security protocols, and potential risk assessments. He studied the faces of everyone who would be in proximity to the Queen Consort, memorized their backgrounds, and maintained detailed mental notes about anything that seemed unusual or out of place. Today's schedule appeared routine. The Queen Consort had a morning meeting with charity representatives, followed by lunch with members of the Women's Institute, and an afternoon appointment that was simply marked as private meeting in the official diary. Marcus had learned not to question such entries. The royal family valued their privacy, and discretion was paramount in his line of work. As he walked through the security checkpoint, Marcus exchanged brief nods with his colleagues. Sarah Mitchell, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s who handled communications, gave him a knowing smile. "Another quiet day ahead," she remarked, though they both knew that in royal protection, no day was truly quiet. The first indication that this day would be different came during the morning briefing. Chief Inspector David Harrison, a man with 25 years of royal protection experience, seemed unusually tense as he addressed the security team. "Gentlemen, ladies," Harrison began, his voice carrying an edge that Marcus had rarely heard before. "Today we have some unusual circumstances. There's been intelligence suggesting that certain individuals may attempt to make unauthorized contact with members of the royal family. I want everyone on heightened alert." Marcus raised his hand. "Sir, do we have specific details about these individuals or the nature of the potential contact?" Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "The details are classified at this time. What I can tell you is that we're dealing with people who have strong political motivations and may view certain members of the royal family as approachable for their causes." The briefing continued with standard security protocols, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was being left unsaid. He had learned to trust his instincts over the years, and those instincts were telling him that today's private meeting might be connected to Harrison's unusual warnings. As the morning progressed, Marcus positioned himself strategically throughout Clarence House, maintaining visual contact with the Queen Consort while staying appropriately invisible. He watched as she graciously met with the charity representatives, her warm smile and genuine interest in their causes evident to anyone observing. This was the side of royal life that Marcus found most rewarding to protect, the genuine dedication to public service that often went unnoticed by the general public. During a brief break between appointments, Marcus noticed an unusual flurry of activity in the communications room. Sarah Mitchell was speaking in hushed, urgent tones on multiple phones, while other staff members consulted tablets and documents with expressions of concern. When she emerged from the room, Marcus caught her eye. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Sarah glanced around before responding. "There have been some changes to this afternoon's schedule. The private meeting, well, let's just say it's become more complicated than initially anticipated." "How so?" "I can't give you specifics, Marcus. But I will say this. Keep your eyes open this afternoon, more open than usual." The lunch with the Women's Institute proceeded smoothly, but Marcus found himself studying every face in the room with increased intensity. He had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect when something was amiss, and that ability was sending alarm signals throughout his entire system. It was during the transition between lunch and the afternoon appointment that Marcus first saw him. A tall, thin man with prematurely gray hair and intense dark eyes was standing near the service entrance, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with one of the senior household staff. Something about the man's posture and the urgent nature of his gestures set Marcus on high alert. The man was well-dressed in an expensive suit, but there was something about his demeanor that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable in such formal surroundings. Marcus made a mental note of the man's appearance and decided to investigate further. He had learned that in royal protection, it was better to be overly cautious than to miss a potential threat. As Marcus approached the area where the man had been standing, he overheard fragments of conversation that made his blood run cold. Absolutely essential that she understands the implications. The consequences for the monarchy could be devastating. This may be our only opportunity to prevent a complete disaster. The voices faded as the speakers moved deeper into the building, but Marcus had heard enough to confirm his suspicions. This was no ordinary social meeting. The queen consort was about to meet with someone who represented a significant challenge to the royal family, and for reasons he couldn't yet understand, this meeting was being allowed to proceed. Marcus faced a dilemma that went to the heart of his professional responsibilities. His job was to protect the queen consort from physical harm. But what if the greater threat was to her reputation and, by extension, to the stability of the monarchy itself? What if this meeting, conducted in secret and away from public scrutiny, could later be used to compromise or embarrass the royal family? He thought about his oath of service, about the trust that had been placed in him, and about the potential consequences of whatever was about to unfold. Marcus had always believed that true protection meant anticipating threats before they materialized, not simply reacting after damage had been done. The afternoon sun was streaming through the tall windows of Clarence's house when Marcus made a decision that would change his life forever. He retrieved a small, high-definition recording device from his equipment kit, standard issue for security personnel to document incidents and gather evidence of potential threats. The device was no larger than a pen and could record both audio and video with crystal clarity. As he prepared to position himself for the afternoon meeting, Marcus told himself that he was simply gathering intelligence to better protect his charge. If the meeting proved to be innocuous, he would delete the recording and never speak of it again. But if his instincts were correct, and the queen consort was being drawn into something that could later be used against her or the royal family, then having evidence of what transpired might be the only way to protect them all. The private meeting was scheduled to take place in the queen consort's personal study, a room that Marcus was not typically required to monitor directly. However, his security protocols allowed him to maintain a position in the adjacent corridor, where he could respond quickly to any emergency while respecting the privacy of the meeting. As Marcus took his position, he activated the recording device and concealed it carefully within his jacket. His heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of responsibility he felt. He had dedicated his life to serving the crown, and he was convinced that what he was about to do was an extension of that service, not a betrayal of it. The thin man with gray hair arrived precisely at the scheduled time, accompanied by a woman Marcus didn't recognize. She was perhaps in her 50s, with short auburn hair and the kind of intense, intelligent eyes that suggested she was accustomed to getting her way in difficult negotiations. Both visitors carried briefcases and wore expressions of grim determination. Marcus watched as they were escorted to the study, noting that the usual security protocols seemed to have been relaxed for this meeting. There were fewer personnel present than usual, and those who were on duty seemed to have been instructed to maintain greater than normal distance from the meeting location. From his position in the corridor, Marcus could hear the low murmur of voices from within the study, but couldn't make out specific words. The tone, however, was unmistakably serious and, at times, heated. The meeting continued for nearly 2 hours, far longer than any typical royal appointment. When the visitors finally emerged from the study, Marcus observed their expressions carefully. The woman looked satisfied, almost triumphant, while the man appeared troubled and kept glancing back toward the study door. The queen consort did not emerge to see them off, which was unusual for someone of her gracious nature. As the visitors left the building, Marcus overheard a brief exchange between them that confirmed his worst fears. "Do you think she really understands what she's agreed to?" the man asked. "She understands enough," the woman replied coldly. "And more importantly, we have what we came for." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever had transpired in that meeting, it was clear that the queen consort had been maneuvered into some kind of agreement or commitment that could later be used against her. His decision to record the meeting suddenly seemed not just justified, but essential. However, Marcus also realized that he was now in possession of information that could be explosive if it fell into the wrong hands. He needed to think carefully about his next steps. because once he revealed the existence of the recording, there would be no going back. As his shift ended and he prepared to leave Clarence's house, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had just witnessed something that would have far-reaching consequences for the royal family. The question was no longer whether he had done the right thing by recording the meeting, but what he should do with the information now that he had it. The weight of the recording device in his pocket felt like it carried the future of the monarchy itself. Marcus Thompson, a man who had devoted his life to protecting the royal family, was about to discover that sometimes the greatest threats come from within, and the most difficult decisions are those that require choosing between loyalty and truth. Marcus Thompson couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his modest flat in South London, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the afternoon meeting in his mind. The recording device sat on his nightstand, a small piece of technology that contained what might be the most dangerous information he had ever possessed. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. He needed to understand what he had captured before deciding how to proceed. Using his personal laptop and a pair of high-quality headphones, he began reviewing the recording in the privacy of his home office. What he heard made his blood run cold. The meeting had indeed been with representatives of a foreign government known for its hostile stance toward the British monarchy. The woman, who introduced herself as Dr. Elena Volkov, was apparently a high-ranking diplomat with ties to intelligence services. The man, identified as Thomas Brennan, was revealed to be a British businessman who had been secretly coordinating with foreign interests for years. The conversation that Marcus had recorded was nothing short of shocking. Dr. Volkov had presented the Queen Consort with what she claimed was evidence of financial irregularities within several royal charities. The evidence appeared to be fabricated, but it was sophisticated enough to cause serious damage if it were made public without proper context or investigation. The most disturbing part of the recording came when Dr. Volkov made her proposal. In exchange for keeping the fabricated evidence private, she wanted the Queen Consort to use her influence to advocate for changes in British foreign policy that would benefit her country's interests. Specifically, she wanted support for reducing economic sanctions and increasing trade relationships. Marcus listened in horror as he heard the Queen Consort's responses. It was clear that she was being manipulated and coerced, but she was also trying to find a way to protect the charitable organizations and the people they served from the potential scandal. Her genuine concern for others was being weaponized against her. "I cannot make commitments about government policy," the Queen Consort had said at one point. "That is not within my purview or appropriate for my role." "But you have influence," Dr. Volkov had responded smoothly. "People listen to you. A few carefully worded statements in the right venues could make all the difference. And think of the good you could do for those charities if this unfortunate information never saw the light of day." Marcus realized he was witnessing a sophisticated blackmail operation designed to compromise a senior member of the royal family. The Queen Consort was being pressured to step outside her constitutional role and involve herself in political matters that could damage both her personally and the monarchy as an institution. The recording revealed that the Queen Consort had not agreed to Dr. Volkov's demands, but neither had she definitively refused them. She had asked for time to consider the situation and to consult with advisors about how to handle the alleged evidence against the charities. "I need time to verify these claims and understand the full situation," she had said. "If there are genuine problems with the charitable organizations, they must be addressed properly through official channels." Dr. Volkov's response had been ominous. "Time is a luxury that may not be available, Your Majesty. Public opinion can be quite unforgiving when it comes to financial scandals, especially those involving charitable donations intended to help the most vulnerable members of society." As Marcus continued listening to the recording, he realized that he had captured evidence of a serious crime. This was not just political maneuvering or diplomatic pressure. It was extortion targeting a member of the royal family. The foreign operatives were using fabricated evidence to try to force the Queen Consort into compromising her constitutional position. But Marcus also understood that he was in an impossible situation. The very act of recording the meeting was a serious breach of protocol that could end his career and potentially result in criminal charges. Royal protection officers were bound by strict confidentiality agreements, and recording private meetings without authorization was a clear violation of those agreements. Moreover, if the recording became public, it would cause exactly the kind of scandal that Dr. Trianci Volkov was threatening to create with her fabricated evidence. The fact that foreign agents had gained access to a senior royal and attempted to blackmail her would be a massive embarrassment for the security services and the government. Marcus spent the next several days wrestling with his conscience and trying to decide on the best course of action. He couldn't ignore what he had witnessed, but he also couldn't risk making the situation worse by handling it improperly. His first instinct was to report the incident to his superiors, but he quickly realized that this approach was fraught with complications. Chief Inspector Harrison's behavior during the morning briefing suggested that there might already be awareness of the situation at higher levels of the security apparatus. If that was the case, then Marcus's unauthorized recording might be seen as insubordination rather than helpful intelligence gathering. Marcus decided to do some investigation of his own. Using his security clearance and access to intelligence databases, he began researching Dr. Alina Volkov and Thomas Brennan. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears about the scope of the threat they represented. Volkov was indeed a senior intelligence officer who had been involved in multiple operations targeting Western governments. Her specialty was what intelligence professionals called soft influence, using social relationships, cultural connections, and economic pressures to achieve political objectives without resorting to traditional espionage methods. Thomas Brennan was even more troubling. He was a British citizen who had built a successful import-export business over the past decade, but intelligence reports suggested that his company was being used as a front for foreign intelligence operations. He had been under surveillance for months, and his meeting with the Queen Consort represented a significant escalation in his activities. Most alarming of all, Marcus discovered that there had been similar operations targeting other members of the royal family and senior government officials. Volkov and her network were conducting a systematic campaign to identify and exploit vulnerabilities within the British establishment. Armed with this information, Marcus realized that the recording he had made was not just evidence of a single criminal act, but part of a much larger pattern of foreign interference in British affairs. The Queen Consort had been targeted not because of any personal vulnerability, but because of her position and influence within the royal family. This realization helped Marcus understand why the security briefing had been so unusual. The intelligence services were clearly aware of the broader threat, but they might not have known about the specific operation targeting the Queen Consort. Or worse, they might have known but decided to allow it to proceed in order to gather intelligence about the foreign network. The possibility that the Queen Consort was being used as bait in a larger intelligence operation filled Marcus with rage. She was a public servant who had dedicated herself to charitable work and supporting the monarchy, and the idea that she might be deliberately exposed to danger for operational reasons was unacceptable to him. Marcus made another decision that would prove to be crucial. Instead of immediately reporting the recording to his superiors, he decided to reach out directly to someone he trusted within the royal household. Lady Margaret Ashworth was the Queen Consort's private secretary, a woman with decades of experience in royal service and a reputation for absolute discretion and loyalty. Getting a private meeting with Lady Margaret required careful planning. Marcus couldn't simply request an appointment without raising questions about his motivations. Instead, he used a legitimate security concern about upcoming events as a pretext for scheduling a brief consultation. When Marcus finally sat across from Lady Margaret, in her elegantly appointed office, he found himself face to face with a woman whose sharp blue eyes seemed to see right through him. "Mr. Thompson," she began, "I understand you have some security concerns to discuss. However, I had the distinct impression that there may be more to this meeting than appears in my diary." Marcus took a deep breath. "Ma'am, I have information about a serious threat to Her Majesty that I believe requires immediate attention. However, the way I obtained this information may be problematic." Lady Margaret's expression remained neutral, but Marcus could see her mentally cataloging possible scenarios. "I see. And you came to me rather than following normal security protocols because I'm not certain that normal protocols will adequately protect Her Majesty's interests in this situation." For a long moment, the two sat in silence. Lady Margaret was clearly weighing her options and considering the implications of whatever Marcus was about to reveal. Finally, she leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Thompson, I've been in royal service for over 30 years. I've seen threats come from every conceivable direction, and I've learned that sometimes the greatest dangers come from those who claim to be offering protection. Before you say another word, I need you to understand that if you are about to confess to a breach of protocol or a violation of your oath of service, there may be consequences that cannot be undone." Marcus nodded. "I understand, ma'am. But I believe the threat to Her Majesty is greater than any personal consequences I might face." Lady Margaret studied him for another moment, then made a decision that would change both their lives. "Very well. Show me what you have." As Marcus activated the recording device and began playing back the conversation between the Queen Consort and the foreign operatives, he watched Lady Margaret's face grow increasingly grave. By the time the recording ended, her composed exterior had given way to barely controlled fury. "This is outrageous," she said, her voice tight with anger. "They're trying to turn Her Majesty into an unwitting agent of foreign influence. The constitutional implications alone." She trailed off, clearly thinking through the various ramifications of what they had just heard. After several minutes of silence, she looked up at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and concern. "You've done the right thing bringing this to me, Mr. Thompson, but you've also put both of us in an extremely difficult position. This recording is evidence of a serious crime, but it was obtained through methods that could be seen as violations of your duty." Marcus nodded grimly. "I know, ma'am. I've been wrestling with that dilemma since I made the recording. But I couldn't stand by and watch Her Majesty be manipulated and threatened without taking some action." Lady Margaret was quiet for another moment, then reached for her secure telephone. "I'm going to make some very discreet inquiries with certain people in the security services. People I trust who will understand the delicate nature of this situation. In the meantime, I need you to make copies of this recording and store them securely. If something happens to either of us, this evidence needs to survive." As Marcus prepared to leave Lady Margaret's office, she stopped him with one final warning. "Mr. Thompson, you should be prepared for the possibility that some people will see your actions as betrayal rather than loyalty. Protecting the royal family sometimes means making very difficult choices, and not everyone will understand or appreciate the choice you've made." Marcus nodded, understanding that his life was about to become very complicated. But as he walked back to his post, he felt a sense of relief for the first time in days. He had done what he believed was right, and now the burden of protecting the Queen Consort was no longer his to bear alone. What Marcus didn't know was that his conversation with Lady Margaret had already set in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to his downfall. In the complex world of royal protection and intelligence services, loyalty and betrayal often looked exactly the same from different perspectives. 3 days after his meeting with Lady Margaret Ashworth, Marcus Thompson noticed the first signs that his world was beginning to unravel. It started with small changes that another person might have dismissed as coincidence, but Marcus's training had taught him to pay attention to patterns and anomalies. His security clearance was flagged for what his supervisor called a routine review, but Marcus had never heard of such reviews happening in the middle of an assignment. His access to certain intelligence databases was temporarily restricted, pending the completion of administrative updates. Most concerning of all, he noticed that his colleagues seemed to be avoiding prolonged conversations with him. The changes were subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, but clear enough to send a message. Marcus was being watched, and someone wanted him to know it. Lady Margaret had warned him that there might be consequences for his actions, but Marcus had assumed that any official response would come after a proper investigation of the threats against the Queen Consort. Instead, it appeared that the investigation was focusing on him rather than on the foreign operatives who had attempted to blackmail a member of the royal family. On Thursday morning, Marcus was summoned to a meeting with Chief Inspector David Harrison and a man he didn't recognize. The stranger was introduced as Mr. James Crawford from the Cabinet Office, a title that could mean anything from administrative clerk to senior intelligence officer. "Mr. Thompson," Harrison began, his tone formal and cold, "we understand that you've been conducting some unauthorized research using government databases. Would you care to explain your activities?" Marcus had prepared for this moment, but actually facing it was more difficult than he had anticipated. "Sir, I was investigating potential security threats that I believed might affect the safety of my assigned principal." Crawford leaned forward, his pale eyes fixed on Marcus with uncomfortable intensity. "And what gave you reason to believe that such threats existed?" "I observed suspicious behavior during a private meeting at Clarence House. individuals who appeared to be making threats or applying pressure to the Queen Consort. Harrison and Crawford exchanged a meaningful look. "Thompson," Crawford said slowly, "are you telling us that you were monitoring a private meeting without authorization?" Marcus felt the trap closing around him, but he refused to back down. "I was fulfilling my duty to protect my assigned principal from all threats, sir." "By eavesdropping on private conversations and conducting unauthorized surveillance?" Harrison's voice was rising now. "Do you have any idea how serious these violations are? More serious than allowing foreign operatives to blackmail a member of the royal family?" Marcus shot back, immediately regretting his tone but not his words. Crawford's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Thompson, I think there may be some misunderstandings here that need to be clarified. Why don't you tell us exactly what you think you observed and what evidence you believe you have?" This was the moment of truth. Marcus could either reveal the existence of the recording and face the consequences, or he could try to protect himself by remaining vague about his evidence. But as he thought about the Queen Consort's voice on the recording, clearly distressed by the threats she was facing, he knew he couldn't abandon her now. "I have audio evidence of Dr. Elena Volkov and Thomas Brennan attempting to extort the Queen Consort," Marcus said quietly. "They presented fabricated evidence of financial irregularities in royal charities and demanded that Her Majesty use her influence to advocate for changes in foreign policy." The silence that followed this revelation was deafening. Harrison looked like he had been physically struck, while Crawford's expression remained carefully neutral. "You recorded a private meeting involving the Queen Consort without authorization?" Harrison finally asked. "Yes. Do you understand that this constitutes multiple serious breaches of protocol, violations of your security clearance, and potentially criminal activity?" "I understand that I may face consequences for my actions, sir, but I also understand that I had a duty to protect my principal from threats, even if those threats came from unexpected directions." Crawford spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Mr. Thompson, may we hear this recording?" Marcus had anticipated this request and had prepared copies on multiple devices. He handed over a small audio player and watched as the two men listened to the conversation he had captured. As the recording played, he observed their reactions carefully. Harrison's face showed genuine shock and anger, but Marcus couldn't tell if the anger was directed at the foreign operatives or at him for recording the meeting. Crawford's expression remained unreadable throughout the entire playback, but Marcus noticed that he took detailed notes and seemed particularly interested in certain portions of the conversation. When the recording ended, Crawford was the first to speak. "This is very serious, Mr. Thompson. Very serious indeed." "Yes, sir. That's why I felt I had to act." "I'm not referring to the content of the meeting," Crawford said coldly. "I'm referring to your unauthorized recording of a private conversation involving a senior member of the royal family. Do you have any idea what kind of precedent this sets? What kind of message this sends about the security and privacy that members of the royal family can expect?" Marcus felt his heart sinking. "Sir, with respect, shouldn't we be more concerned about the fact that foreign operatives gained access to the Queen Consort and attempted to compromise her?" Harrison leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, you need to understand something. The individuals you've identified were not unknown to us. Volkov and Thomas Brennan have been under surveillance for months. Their meeting with the Queen Consort was part of a carefully planned operation designed to identify and disrupt their network." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. You knew they were going to threaten Her Majesty. "We knew they were going to attempt to make contact," Crawford corrected. "We did not know the specific nature of their approach, which is why your recording is actually quite valuable from an intelligence perspective." "But you used Her Majesty as bait," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We allowed a situation to develop where we could observe their methods and gather evidence of their criminal activities," Harrison said firmly. "The Queen Consort was never in any real danger, and she was briefed on the general nature of the situation beforehand." Marcus felt as though the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Everything he had believed about the situation was being turned upside down. She knew? She knew it was an intelligence operation? She knew that she might be approached by individuals attempting to influence her, and she agreed to cooperate with our efforts to identify and expose such attempts, Crawford explained. What she didn't know were the specific details of their approach or the exact nature of their demands. But she seemed genuinely distressed on the recording. She seemed to believe the threats were real. Her reaction had to be genuine for the operation to be successful, Harrison said. If she had known exactly what to expect, her responses wouldn't have been authentic, and the operatives might have become suspicious. Marcus stared at the two men in disbelief. So you're telling me that everything I witnessed was part of a planned intelligence operation? That I risked my career and potentially committed crimes to protect someone who was never actually in danger? Crawford's expression softened slightly. Mr. Whisper, Thompson, your instincts were sound, and your motivations were admirable. You saw what appeared to be a threat to someone you were sworn to protect, and you took action to address that threat. Those are exactly the qualities we want in Royal Protection Officers. But you also demonstrated a concerning willingness to violate protocol and exceed your authority when you believed the circumstances justified it, Harrison continued. From an operational security perspective, that makes you a liability. What you did was record a sensitive intelligence operation without authorization, Crawford added. That recording could compromise ongoing investigations and endanger operatives who are still working to disrupt Dr. Volkov's network. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and devastation. Relief that the Queen Consort had not actually been in the danger he had believed, but devastation at the realization that his actions, while well-intentioned, had potentially damaged a legitimate security operation. What happens now? He asked. Harrison and Crawford exchanged another look before Crawford answered. Your security clearance is being revoked, effective immediately. You're being transferred out of royal protection, pending a full review of your actions. Depending on the results of that review, you may face disciplinary action or criminal charges.
And the recording? All copies will be confiscated and classified.
You will sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that will prevent you from discussing any aspect of this situation with anyone, ever. Violation of that agreement will result in immediate prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. Marcus nodded numbly. He had expected consequences, but the full scope of his situation was only now becoming clear. His career in royal protection was over. His reputation within the security services was destroyed, and ironically, his efforts to protect the Queen Consort might have actually made future protection efforts more difficult. As the meeting concluded, Crawford made one final comment that would haunt Marcus for months to come. Mr. Thompson, in intelligence work, things are rarely what they appear to be on the surface. The greatest threats often come from those who claim to be offering protection, and the most dangerous enemies are sometimes those who believe they're acting as friends. Marcus understood the warning implicit in those words. He was being told in no uncertain terms that his version of events would not be believed if he ever attempted to make it public. The official record would show that he had violated his oath of service and committed serious breaches of security protocol. Any attempt to justify his actions by claiming he was protecting the royal family would be dismissed as the desperate lies of a disgraced security officer. Over the following days, Marcus's life was systematically dismantled. His apartment was searched, his personal computers were confiscated, and his financial records were scrutinized. He was interviewed multiple times by different agencies, each asking the same questions but approaching them from different angles. Throughout these interviews, Marcus maintained his position that he had acted to protect the Queen Consort from what he believed was a genuine threat. He acknowledged his violations of protocol but refused to express regret for trying to defend someone he was sworn to protect. The investigator seemed particularly interested in whether Marcus had shared information about the recording with anyone else. When he mentioned his conversation with Lady Margaret Ashworth, their interest intensified dramatically. It was during one of these interviews that Marcus learned the full extent of the trap that had been set for him. The investigation revealed that Lady Margaret had indeed made discreet inquiries about the situation after their meeting, but those inquiries had been immediately reported back to the intelligence services. Marcus realized that he had been allowed to believe that he was acting independently and heroically, when in reality every step of his investigation had been monitored and anticipated. The meeting with Lady Margaret, his research into Dr. Volkov and Thomas Brennan, even his emotional struggle with the decision to make the recording. All of it had been observed and analyzed. The most painful revelation came when Marcus learned that Lady Margaret herself was part of the intelligence operation. Her role as the Queen Consort's private secretary made her perfectly positioned to monitor and influence Marcus's actions. Her apparent outrage at the recording had been genuine, but not for the reasons Marcus had believed. She had been angry because Marcus's unauthorized recording had created complications for an ongoing operation, not because she was shocked by the threats against the Queen Consort. Her decision to make discreet inquiries had actually been a signal to her intelligence contacts that Marcus needed to be brought under control. As Marcus sat in his empty apartment, contemplating the ruins of his career and the betrayal of people he had trusted, he began to understand the true nature of the world he had been working in. The lines between protection and manipulation, between loyalty and betrayal, were far more blurred than he had ever imagined. The Queen Consort, whom he had risked everything to protect, had never actually needed his protection. The threats he had perceived were part of a carefully orchestrated performance designed to expose foreign operatives. His colleagues, whom he had trusted with his life, had been watching and evaluating him throughout the entire ordeal. Most painfully of all, his genuine desire to serve and protect had been twisted into evidence of his unsuitability for that very service. The system he had devoted his life to had used his loyalty against him, and then discarded him when that loyalty became inconvenient. But as Marcus reflected on everything that had happened, one question continued to trouble him. If the intelligence services had known about Dr. Volkov and Thomas Brennan, if they had planned the entire operation, and if the Queen Consort had been briefed on the general situation, then why had she seemed so genuinely distressed on the recording? Had her performance been even more sophisticated than he had been led to believe? Or was there something about the situation that even the intelligence services hadn't fully anticipated or controlled? These questions would soon lead Marcus to discoveries that would shatter his remaining faith in the system he had served, and ultimately drive him to make choices that would endanger not just his own future, but the stability of the monarchy itself. 6 weeks after his dismissal from royal protection, Marcus Thompson was working as a night security guard at a shopping center in East London. The fall from protecting the Queen Consort to checking locks and monitoring empty stores felt like a cruel joke. But it was the only employment he could find with his tainted security record. The official story, as it had been carefully constructed by the intelligence services, was that Marcus had suffered a psychological breakdown that led to paranoid behavior and serious violations of protocol. His security clearance had been permanently revoked, and a notation in his file made it impossible for him to work in any capacity that required background checks. Marcus had signed the non-disclosure agreements and accepted his fate, believing that at least his sacrifice had served to protect an ongoing intelligence operation. But doubts continued to gnaw at him, particularly about the Queen Consort's reaction during the recorded meeting. The answer to his questions came from an unexpected source. Thomas Brennan appeared at the shopping center on a rainy Thursday night in April, 3 hours after closing time. Marcus was conducting his routine patrol when he noticed a well-dressed man sitting in the food court, apparently waiting for someone. Recognition hit Marcus like a physical blow. The man who had participated in the attempted blackmail of the Queen Consort was sitting 20 feet away, seemingly unconcerned about being discovered. Marcus's first instinct was to call the police, but something in Brennan's posture suggested that this was not a random encounter. The man was clearly waiting for Marcus specifically. "Mr. Thompson," Brennan called out softly. "I was hoping we might have a conversation." Marcus approached cautiously, his hand near the radio that would summon help if needed. "You're taking quite a risk coming here, Mr. Brennan. I assume you're aware that you're wanted for questioning in connection with threats against the royal family." Brennan laughed bitterly. "Wanted for questioning? Is that what they told you? I'm curious, Mr. Doe." "Thompson, what exactly do you think happened during that meeting at Clarence House?" "I know exactly what happened. I have it on tape." "Yes, you do. And that recording is exactly why I'm here." Brennan stood up slowly, his hands visible to show he posed no threat. "May I suggest that what you think you know about that meeting is only part of the story?" Against his better judgment, Marcus found himself intrigued. "I'm listening." "The intelligence operation that your former colleagues told you about? The carefully planned sting designed to expose foreign operatives? It's all true as far as it goes. But there were elements of that operation that even your superiors didn't fully understand. Brennan reached into his jacket slowly and withdrew a tablet computer. Before you decide whether to trust me, I think you should see this. The tablet showed what appeared to be a secure communication interface. Brennan typed in several passwords and security codes, then turned the screen toward Marcus. What he saw made his blood run cold. The screen showed a series of encrypted messages between Dr. Elena Volkov and someone identified only as Crown Asset. The messages detailed plans for the meeting with the Queen Consort, but they revealed a much more complex operation than anything Marcus had been told about. According to the communications, the fabricated evidence of charitable irregularities was not fabricated at all. The evidence was real, and it implicated several senior members of the royal family in financial mismanagement that bordered on criminal behavior. More shocking still, the messages revealed that Dr. Volkov was not working for a foreign government at all. She was actually a British intelligence officer who had been assigned to gather evidence of the financial irregularities and present it to the Queen Consort in a way that would force her to take action. You're telling me that Dr. Volkov is working for British intelligence? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Was working, Brennan corrected. Past tense. She's dead, Mr. Thompson. Killed in what was made to look like a car accident 3 days after your recording was confiscated. Marcus stared at the screen in disbelief. But the intelligence services told me she was under surveillance. They said she was part of a foreign network they were trying to expose. The intelligence services told you what they needed you to believe in order to neutralize you as a threat, Brennan replied. You see, your recording didn't just capture evidence of an intelligence operation. It captured evidence of a cover-up that goes to the very heart of the monarchy. Brennan scrolled through more messages on the tablet. Dr. Volkov wasn't trying to blackmail the Queen Consort. She was trying to give her evidence of serious crimes committed by other members of the royal family, and she was offering the Queen Consort a chance to address the situation quietly before it became public. Then why did it sound like blackmail on the recording? Because that's how it had to sound. If Volkov had simply walked in and handed over evidence of royal financial crimes, the Queen Consort would have been obligated to report it through official channels immediately. But if it appeared that she was being blackmailed with fabricated evidence, she would have reason to investigate the claims privately first. Marcus felt his understanding of the entire situation shifting once again. You're saying the whole meeting was designed to give the Queen Consort plausible deniability while she investigated financial crimes within her own family? Exactly. And your recording captured her agreeing to look into the allegations, which was exactly what Volkov hoped to achieve. But it also captured evidence of a British intelligence operation that was designed to expose corruption within the monarchy, something that powerful people had every reason to suppress. The implications of what Brennan was telling him slowly sank in. Marcus had not stumbled onto a foreign plot against the royal family. He had accidentally recorded evidence of an internal investigation into royal financial crimes, and his recording had been used to identify and eliminate the people conducting that investigation. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. Because you're one of the few people who has actual evidence of what transpired, and because I believe you still care about protecting the monarchy, even if that means protecting it from itself. Brennan showed him additional documents on the tablet, including financial records that appeared to show systematic diversion of charitable funds for personal use by several senior royals. The evidence was damning, but Marcus found himself questioning everything he was being shown. How do I know any of this is real? How do I know you're not trying to manipulate me the same way everyone else has? You don't, Brennan admitted. But I can give you something that no one else can. The truth about what happened to Dr. Princeton, Volkov, and proof that your recording was used to identify her as a threat to certain interests within the establishment. He produced a second tablet showing what appeared to be internal intelligence service communications. The messages showed that immediately after Marcus's recording was analyzed, orders were given to neutralize the Volkov operation and eliminate any evidence of unauthorized financial investigations. Marcus read through the messages with growing horror. The communications made it clear that Dr. Volkov's death had been ordered specifically because of the evidence contained in his recording. His attempt to protect the Queen Consort had inadvertently led to the murder of a British intelligence officer who was trying to expose corruption within the royal family. Like God, Marcus whispered. They killed her because of what I recorded. They killed her because she was getting too close to the truth about royal finances, And your recording gave them the evidence they needed to justify eliminating her, Brennan corrected. But there's something else you need to understand. Mr. Thompson, the Queen Consort knows. Knows what? She knows about the financial irregularities. She knows that Dr. Volkov was trying to help her address them quietly. And she knows that Volkov was killed to silence her. Brennan's voice was grim. She's been living with that knowledge for 6 weeks now, unable to do anything about it because any action she takes could be seen as evidence that she was complicit in the original crimes. Marcus thought back to the recording, to the genuine distress he had heard in the Queen Consort's voice. She wasn't acting, was she? She really was upset because she understood what was happening. She was upset because she realized that she was being presented with evidence of crimes committed by people she loved and trusted, and she was being asked to choose between protecting them and protecting the institution they all served. The weight of the situation was overwhelming. Marcus had believed he was protecting the Queen Consort from external threats, when in reality, she was facing the much more devastating threat of corruption within her own family. His recording had not only failed to protect her, it had made her situation far worse by eliminating the one person who might have been able to help her address the problem quietly. "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked. "I want you to help me finish what Dr. Volkov started," Brennan replied. "The evidence of royal financial crimes still exists, but it's scattered and incomplete. Your recording contains key pieces of that evidence, and if we can combine it with what Volkov gathered, we might be able to build a case that could force the necessary reforms. You want me to violate my non-disclosure agreement and risk prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. I want you to help expose crimes that are being covered up at the highest levels of government and the royal family," Brennan corrected. "The question is whether you believe that justice is more important than your own safety." Marcus stared at the evidence displayed on the tablets, thinking about everything that had led him to this moment. He had joined royal protection because he believed in service and duty. He had made the recording because he thought he was protecting someone he was sworn to serve. He had accepted his dismissal because he believed his sacrifice had served a greater good. Now he was being asked to risk everything again, but this time for a very different reason. Instead of protecting the royal family from external threats, he was being asked to help expose internal corruption that threatened the very foundations of the monarchy. "If I agree to help you," Marcus said slowly, "what happens to the Queen Consort? She's already suffered enough because of my previous actions. If we succeed, she'll be freed from the impossible position she's currently in," Brennan replied. "Right now, she's trapped between her loyalty to her family and her duty to the crown. If the financial crimes are exposed and addressed properly, she can stop being an unwilling accomplice to a cover-up. And if we fail? If we fail, the corruption continues. More people like Dr. Volkov disappear, and the monarchy slowly destroys itself from within." Brennan's expression was grave. "Mr. Thompson, the institution you devoted your life to serving, is being poisoned by the very people who should be its guardians. The only question is whether you're going to help save it or watch it die." As Marcus stood in the empty shopping center, surrounded by the detritus of his ruined career and faced with a choice that could either redeem his previous actions or destroy what remained of his life, he realized that everything he had believed about duty, loyalty, and service was about to be put to the ultimate test. The recording device that had started this entire ordeal was still in the possession of the intelligence services, but Marcus had kept detailed notes about its contents. Combined with the evidence that Brennan was offering, those notes might be enough to expose the truth about what had really happened during that fateful meeting at Clarence House. But taking that step would mean crossing a line from which there could be no return. Once he became a whistleblower against the very system he had spent his life serving, there would be no possibility of redemption or forgiveness. He would be marked as a traitor, and powerful people would do everything in their power to destroy him. The irony was not lost on Marcus, that he was once again being asked to choose between official loyalty and what he believed to be right. The difference was that this time, he understood the full consequences of his choice. As dawn broke over London, Marcus Thompson made the decision that would define the rest of his life and potentially change the course of the British monarchy forever. Marcus Thompson's decision to cooperate with Thomas Brennan set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose one of the most significant scandals in modern royal history. But the path to that exposure was fraught with danger, betrayal, and personal sacrifice that tested every principle Marcus held dear. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked with Brennan to piece together the full scope of the financial irregularities within the Royal Charitable Network. What they discovered was a systematic scheme that had been operating for nearly a decade, involving the diversion of millions of pounds in charitable donations to private accounts controlled by several senior members of the royal family. The scheme was sophisticated and had been carefully designed to avoid detection by standard auditing procedures. Donations intended for vulnerable children, homeless veterans, and environmental conservation were being funneled through a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. The money was then used to fund personal expenses, private investments, and luxury purchases that the royals could not justify through their official income. Most damaging of all, the evidence showed that the scheme had the knowledge and tacit approval of several high-ranking government officials who were supposed to provide oversight of royal finances. The corruption extended far beyond the royal family itself and implicated members of parliament, senior civil servants, and intelligence officials. Dr. Elena Volkov had been a forensic accountant working for an anti-corruption unit within British intelligence. Her assignment had been to investigate suspicious financial patterns that had been flagged by international banking monitoring systems. When her investigation led her to the Royal Charitable Network, she had tried to find a way to address the situation without causing a public scandal that could destabilize the monarchy. Her solution had been to approach the Queen Consort directly, presenting the evidence in a way that would allow for quiet internal reform rather than public exposure. The meeting at Clarence House had been her attempt to give the royal family a chance to address the corruption privately before it was discovered by external investigators. But powerful interests within the government and intelligence services had no intention of allowing the corruption to be exposed, even quietly. Too many careers and reputations were at stake, and too much money was involved. When Marcus's recording provided evidence of Volkov's investigation, those interests moved quickly to eliminate the threat she represented. The official story of Volkov's death, a tragic car accident caused by mechanical failure, was accepted without question by the media and the public. But Brennan had evidence showing that the accident had been arranged by intelligence operatives acting on orders from senior government officials. As Marcus delved deeper into the conspiracy, he began to understand the true scope of what he was facing. This was not simply a case of royal financial misconduct. It was a systematic cover-up that involved multiple government agencies, senior politicians, and intelligence operatives. The people responsible for the cover-up had already committed murder to protect their secrets, and they would not hesitate to do so again. The danger became personal when Marcus discovered that his own apartment was under surveillance, and his phone calls were being monitored. Brennan warned him that his cooperation with the investigation had been detected, and that he was now considered a significant threat by the same people who had ordered Volkov's death. Marcus was forced to go into hiding, staying in a series of safe houses provided by Brennan's network of contacts. As a former intelligence operative himself, Brennan had connections with individuals who had become disillusioned with government corruption and were willing to help expose it. From their hiding places, Marcus and Brennan worked to compile a comprehensive dossier of evidence that could be presented to investigative journalists and international law enforcement agencies. The dossier included Marcus's detailed recollections of the recorded conversation, Brennan's communications with Volkov, financial records showing the flow of charitable funds to private accounts, and evidence of the cover-up that had led to Volkov's murder. The most crucial piece of evidence was a backup copy of Marcus's original recording that Brennan had managed to obtain through his intelligence contacts. The recording not only proved that the meeting had taken place and captured the Queen Consort's reactions to the evidence presented to her, but it also contained background conversations that provided additional context about the scope of the financial scheme. As they prepared to release their evidence, Marcus struggled with the implications of what they were about to do. Exposing the corruption would likely destroy several members of the royal family and could potentially destabilize the monarchy as an institution. The Queen Consort, whom he had originally tried to protect, would inevitably be caught up in the scandal, even though she was more victim than perpetrator. But Marcus had come to understand that protecting the monarchy as an institution was more important than protecting individual members of the royal family, even if those individuals were people he had sworn to serve. The corruption they had uncovered was like a cancer that would eventually destroy the monarchy from within if it was not exposed and addressed. The decision of when and how to release the evidence was taken out of their hands when Brennan was killed in what appeared to be a robbery gone wrong. Marcus, who had been staying in a different safe house, learned of Brennan's death from news reports that described him as the victim of a random street crime. But Marcus knew better. The timing was too convenient, and the method too similar to other accidents that had befallen people who threatened powerful interests. Brennan's death was a clear message that the conspiracy was still active and still willing to kill to protect itself. Alone and with limited resources, Marcus realized that his only chance of survival was to make the evidence public as quickly as possible. If the information was in the hands of journalists and investigators around the world, killing him would no longer serve any purpose. Using encrypted communication channels that Brennan had established, Marcus contacted investigative journalists at 3 major international news organizations. He provided them with copies of all the evidence he and Brennan had compiled, along with detailed explanations of how the various pieces fit together. The journalists were initially skeptical, given the explosive nature of the allegations, and Marcus's status as a disgraced former royal protection officer. But the evidence was too comprehensive and too well documented to ignore. Within days, teams of investigative reporters were working to verify the claims and prepare comprehensive exposés. The first stories broke simultaneously, in London, New York, and Sydney, creating a media firestorm that dominated global news coverage for weeks. The headlines were devastating. Royal charity scandal, millions diverted to private accounts. British intelligence officer murdered to cover up royal corruption. The Queen Consort's secret meeting that exposed palace financial crimes. The evidence was so compelling that even traditionally royalist media outlets were forced to cover the story seriously. The recording of the Clarence House meeting, when it was finally released, showed clearly that the Queen Consort had been genuinely shocked by the evidence presented to her and had agreed to investigate the allegations quietly. Public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Protests erupted outside royal residences, demanding accountability and reform. Every senior royals were forced to step back from public duties while investigations were conducted. Government ministers resigned, intelligence officials were arrested, and the entire system of royal financial oversight was subjected to intense scrutiny. The Queen Consort, rather than being destroyed by the scandal, emerged as a sympathetic figure who had been trapped in an impossible situation. Her obvious distress during the recorded meeting, and evidence showing that she had attempted to address the corruption once she learned of it, actually enhanced her public standing as someone who had tried to do the right thing in difficult circumstances. Marcus, meanwhile, had become a global figure, hailed by some as a hero who had exposed corruption at the highest levels of government, and condemned by others as a traitor who had betrayed the institution he was sworn to protect. The legal consequences for Marcus were severe, but not as devastating as he had feared. His violations of the Official Secrets Act resulted in criminal charges, but the public support for his actions and the obvious importance of the information he had revealed led to a suspended sentence rather than imprisonment. More importantly, the revelations led to comprehensive reforms in royal financial oversight, the establishment of new anti-corruption measures within the intelligence services, and criminal prosecutions of several individuals involved in the cover-up. The royal family itself survived the scandal, but was fundamentally changed by it. New transparency measures were implemented, financial practices were reformed, and several members of the royal family permanently withdrew from public life. In the years that followed, Marcus reflected often on the choices he had made and their consequences. He had entered royal protection with a simple desire to serve and protect, but had discovered that sometimes protection required exposing the very people he was meant to serve. The recording he had made in what seemed like a moment of moral clarity had ultimately revealed a web of corruption and criminality that reached the highest levels of British society. His willingness to sacrifice his career and risk his life had prevented that corruption from remaining hidden indefinitely. Marcus never returned to security work. Instead, he became an advocate for government transparency and worked with international organizations focused on exposing corruption in democratic institutions. His experience had taught him that the greatest threats to democratic societies often came not from external enemies, but from internal corruption that went unchallenged. The Queen Consort, for her part, used the scandal as an opportunity to reform and strengthen the royal charitable network. Under her leadership, new oversight mechanisms were established, Financial transparency was dramatically increased, and the charitable organizations became more effective than they had ever been before. In private moments, when asked about her thoughts on Marcus Thompson's actions, the Queen Consort was reported to have said that while she regretted the pain the revelations had caused to many people, she was grateful that someone had cared enough about the monarchy to risk everything to save it from itself. The official records of the entire affair remain classified, and many of the details may never be fully known to the public. But the reforms that resulted from Marcus's revelations fundamentally changed how the royal family operates and how the British government oversees its activities. Marcus Thompson's sacrifice, his willingness to risk everything to expose corruption and protect an institution he loved, ultimately served the cause he had always believed in. By betraying the individuals who were betraying the monarchy, he had remained faithful to the deeper principles that had originally motivated his service. The guard who had been fired for secretly filming had become the guardian who saved the monarchy from its own worst impulses. History would remember him not as a traitor, but as someone who understood that true loyalty sometimes requires the courage to act against those who claim to represent the ideals they are actually betraying. In the end, Marcus had kept faith with his original oath to protect and serve, even when doing so required him to sacrifice everything he had worked to achieve. The recording that had destroyed his career had ultimately preserved the institution he had dedicated his life to protecting, ensuring that it could continue to serve the British people with integrity and honor for generations to come.